Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Hey guys, my name's Connor if you're new. I like to learn. That's what we're going to do right now. And you guys can watch along with me and help me learn about this. This is a confusing period. A lot of periods in English history are pretty confusing to me, but that doesn't stop me from wanting to learn about them. Knowledge, a great channel, original link top of the description. My name's Connor if you're new. Hello, I don't know if I said that already. Let's learn. Time to focus. I got my coffee. I am all set. My water. Stay hydrated, guys. Let's go. I'm going to need your help.
England's journey into the Renaissance would be helmed by its most famous royal dynasty. These monarchs, with
Tudors.
their personal beliefs, biases, and neuroses, would change the lives of their subjects in dramatic ways.
Mary looks scary. Did Queen Elizabeth I kill Mary? Or am I thinking of someone else? I think I am. I'm pausing already. I'm sorry. Okay. Zone in.
Neuroses would change the lives of their subjects in dramatic ways. They shaped England more than most royals ever did, and enshrined themselves as some of the most famous and infamous names in English history. In this video,
shows
we will
Shakespeare
follow
when
England
infamous.
during the reign of the Tudors as court scandals, foreign invasions, and earth-shaking religious reforms changed England forever.
Spanish Armada.
The Winter King. Henry VII faced an uphill battle. Having spent most of his life in France, he had few connections in England and was more culturally French than English. He cleared the board of many potential enemies by cleverly dating his...
Sorry. Question, guys. Was Brittany before Britain became a term for the UK? Or was it the other way around? Or do they somehow have no connection in name origin and it's just a coincidence, which I find hard to believe?
He cleared the board of many potential enemies by cleverly dating his reign to the day before Bosworth, retroactively making any allies of Richard III guilty of treason, allowing him to seize their lands and titles. His weak claim to the throne proved a constant menace. Henry had to fight off two major pretenders to his throne. First, Lambert Simnel in 1487, who claimed to be an...
I'm sorry, guys. Just the original link top of the description. I'm done apologizing for pausing too much. If I don't learn, what's the point? I don't get this part. By dating his reign to the day before the Battle of Bosworth, Henry VII made it appear that Richard III was already a traitor. This meant anyone who fought for Richard could be declared guilty of treason for opposing the king, lawful king. This gave Henry legal grounds to seize the lands. But why did he have to date his reign to the day before Bosworth to do that? I don't understand.
Proved a constant menace. Henry had to fight off two major pretenders to his throne. First, Lambert Simnel in 1487, who claims to be a nephew of Richard III, and then Perkin Warbeck in 1491, who claims to be one of the missing princes in the Tower. Most historians agree both claimants were frauds, but they showed how tenuous Henry's reign was at the start. In the latter case, Henry's own Chamberlain Sir William Stanley secretly conspired to help Warbeck, which earned him an execution. However, by the late 1490s, things had settled. Henry had two sons to serve as heirs and secured England's foreign relations with strategic marriages. He married his eldest son Arthur to Catherine of Aragon, hoping to bind England and Spain through marriage into an anti-French alliance.
Question, guys. This might be stupid, but if Arthur was chosen to be his heir over Henry, would he be Arthur the First, or would he take the name Henry VIII?
Strategic marriages.
Even though he's not Henry.
He married his eldest son Arthur to Catherine of Aragon, hoping to bind England and Spain through marriage into an anti-French alliance. Arthur's sudden death in 1502 came as a shock, but Henry salvaged the alliance by offering the hand of his second son and new heir, also named Henry instead. He also repaired relations with Scotland by marrying off his daughter Margaret to King James IV. Through it all, one of Henry's main aims was to fix the country's finances. This he did with meticulous care, poring over his accounts every day and carefully tracking everything he was owed. Henry redirected funds into his personal treasury to keep a close eye on things, but aside from his occasional extravagance in courtly ritual, he was something of a penny pincher. His uncompromising will to squeeze out every penny he was owed and not waste it didn't earn him love. He was quite unpopular by the time he died, but it did heal England's finances. When he died in 1509, Henry left the
Thought he kept it for himself.
crown wealthier and more financially secure than it had been in decades. Enclosures. The picture for England at large was not so simple. By 1500, England's population had recovered from the effects of the Black Death. Wages and the availability of land was no longer growing as they had during the 15th century, and in some places they were starting to shrink. One of the hot-button issues of the age was enclosures. This was the process of a landowner buying up a large area of land and enclosing it with a hedge or fence to prevent its public use. This denial of land to the commons angered many regular Englishmen and limited their ability to farm. The end of the feudal system meant landlords no longer saw their land as a means to provide for their military obligations, but
Okay, so I was confused for a sec because I thought that was always the case. And then people would work under these guys, but that changed.
something saw their land as a means to provide for their military obligations, but as something to be exploited for maximum profit.
Okay, I understand. That clears it up.
Therefore, many landlords were happy to evict farmers to use the land to pasture animals, especially sheep for wool. Several laws were passed under Henry VII to try tackling enclosures, but these laws had little effect. Between 1485 and 1500, for example, some 16,000 acres of land was enclosed across Northamptonshire, Warwickshire, Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and Berkshire, most of which went to pasture. The effects of enclosure were not felt.
What is an acre to a square mile, just so I can understand? He said 18,000 acres.
Of which Warwickshire, Oxfordshire, and acres of land, 5 and 1500, for example, some 16,000 acres.
16,000. Sorry, guys, just one sec. That's only 25 square miles? In total?
Acres of land was enclosed across Northamptonshire, Warwickshire, Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, and Berkshire, most of which went to pasture. The effects of enclosure were not felt equally everywhere. While enclosures were a non-issue in some shires, others faced huge challenges, like Leicestershire, where some 40 villages were totally enclosed and had to be abandoned between 1485 and 1530. Managing pasturage took much less labor per acreage than farming, leading to unemployment that drove more and more rural people into the cities. Urban life was took much less labor per acreage than farming, leading to unemployment that drove more and more rural people into the cities. Urban life was not much easier. It was common for people to work 12-hour days or more.
So guys, this seems to be a giant era in time of English history for the fact that it's swapping pretty rapidly from the older feudal system where you were farmers inside of land that a lord possessed, and although not an optimal situation, you still had a job and everything, towards a place where it was just the lord's land, and whatever they wanted to do with it, they could do with it, regardless of the effect of unemployment it had on the people living in it. And so that forced a lot of people going to the cities. So this is a big transformation in a little time.
And the average laborer would have very little of his wages left after paying for the main expenses of rent, food, drink, fuel, and clothes. However, when harvests were good and work available, the urban Englishman enjoyed a quality of life above that of any commoner before him. Life was still hard, but it was probably easier than it had been for any generations before him. This urbanization was a continual trend of the Tudor era. In London alone, the urban population rose from around 50,000 when Henry VII took power to 200,000 when Elizabeth died in 1603. Henry VIII. Life was changing in England, but few people could have expected the changes that began during the reign of Henry VIII.
Religious changes.
History
mainly,
knows Henry as a tyrannous glutton who tore apart the church to satisfy his lust for a woman to give him a son.
Yeah, so I hear Henry VIII in his earlier reign and life was seen as a pretty good leader, right? It's just towards the end he got the bad reputation.
At the start of his reign, at least, Henry was nothing like this. Handsome, active, and intelligent, Henry spent his early reign basking in the wealth his father had left him. Fond of sports, music, and hunting, Henry's court was a thriving hub of Renaissance culture and royal ceremony that ranked among the finest in Europe. A devout Catholic, Henry satisfied his faith and desire for glory with wars in France and Spain, although he never achieved any great victory worth retelling. By the late 1520s, though, two serious problems had emerged. First, Henry's extravagance was depleting the crown's treasury. Secondly, Catherine of Aragon had failed to produce a son, and she was getting too old to bear him anymore. By now, the king's eyes had begun to wander to Anne Boleyn, who promised Henry
So he was great with the church until it didn't fit his use.
an heir, if only he could marry her. In 1527, Henry failed to secure an annulment of his marriage to Catherine from the Pope, which left him furious. But Anne Boleyn was more than just a pretty face. She was a Protestant. By now, the Protestant Reformation was well underway in Europe, and it was probably Boleyn who led
I wonder if that's part of why the Pope denied it, because he wanted to marry a Protestant.
Henry to embrace was well underway in Europe, and it was probably Boleyn who led Henry to embrace it. Henry began appointing other Protestants to powerful positions, such as Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop of Canterbury and Thomas Cromwell as his chief minister. The sincerity of Henry's conversion has always been questioned. Did he only do it to marry Anne? Possibly. Was it a power grab? Henry was hardly the first king of England to butt heads with Rome over church authority. Either way, in April 1533, Parliament declares the king the supreme authority on religious matters in England and Wales. Henceforth, the Church of England would not submit to papal authority. Ignoring the excommunication that came his way,
I'm sorry, but him being seen as this like loyal, religious kind of Catholic man, as soon as he can't get the woman he wants, he's like, okay, screw them, I'm the head of the church.
Henry annulled authority. Ignoring the excommunication that came his way, Henry annulled his marriage with Catherine to marry Anne, who was already pregnant with what she promised would be a son, only for her to deliver him a daughter, Elizabeth.
Yeah, isn't the... I know the determination, because only the male has the chromosome that determines if a pregnancy ends up in a male or not. But I'm not sure if it's a chance or if, like, certain men just can't produce sons.
The English Reformation.
Might sound stupid.
For the people of England, Henry's break with Rome was mostly procedural and did not directly affect their daily lives. Worship continued under what some historians have labeled Catholicism without the Pope. More significant for England at large was the subsequent dissolution of the monasteries. Seen as bastions of papal power and a bounty of wealth and land for the cash-strapped crown, Henry ordered every monastery in England to be closed in 1530.
This is the thing about when you have autocratic or monarchical, complete monarchical power, is that I'm sure that Henry VIII is acting in a way that I think a lot of people with his power would act in the same situation. But it shows you how when one person is so above any law or authority and is the authority of just how much they can change, you know?
6. Almost 1,000 years of English monastic tradition was ended by royal decree. The monasteries had been centers of charity and shelter for many in England. Coupled with the uncertainty from the break with Rome, as well as spiraling food prices thanks to poor harvests in 1535, a massive rebellion known as the Pilgrimage of Grace erupted in 1536. Described as the greatest internal threat ever posed to the Tudor dynasty, the pilgrimage was both a religious and economic protest against the consequences of Henry.
Guys, does anyone know this kind of, famous monk look of keeping the hair here and shaving your head? When did that first become this sort of standard tradition with monks, I wonder?
His government, a religious and economic protest against the consequences of Henry's government. Although they did not target the king himself. Most of their ire fell upon his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, as a scapegoat to avoid the crime of criticizing the crown. Despite mass sympathy for the rebels, Henry refused to accept the insults to his authority. The Pilgrims lacked the desire to violently oppose the crown and were mostly helpless when Henry ordered their leaders to be rounded up and executed. Concerned
any connection to the later Cromwell?
About further rebellion, Henry passed the Crown of Ireland Act in 1542 to formalize his title as King of Ireland, and he also tightened his grip on Wales with 2 laws in Wales Acts that sought to simplify English administration while stamping out the use of the Welsh language in government there. Both laws came to be resented by the nations they were imposed upon, but rebellion was avoided in both nations. Aside from the monasteries, the other consequential religious change for the English people was the English Bible. English translations had existed before, but from 1539, Henry ordered a copy of the William Tyndale English translations to be placed and read aloud in every church. Opening access to the faith for the common people was one of the more popular Protestant reforms and probably helped people accept the new religious system.
Yeah, I'm curious what might have been changed in translation or on purpose to make that version of the Bible more, akin to what he wants.
The later reign of Henry VIII. Back in the royal court, Anne Boleyn's time in the spotlight was short-lived. Henry grew tired of her, and in 1536, she was accused of adultery and incest, which earned her a spot beneath the headsman's axe. It's unlikely she'd done anything more than lose Henry's interest. Henry had already turned his attention towards Jane Seymour, who he married less than 2 weeks after Anne's death. It was Jane.
It's crazy how it's like at first he couldn't have, his first wife couldn't produce a male heir, and so he goes to the Pope. The Pope says, no, you can't get a divorce. And then he's like, okay, well, now you have no authority here. I'm creating a new religion where I'm the head. And then when it happens again, or he doesn't like them, now in order to get a divorce, you just have to kill him. That's crazy.
Who finally granted him the male heir he'd always wanted, giving birth to Prince Edward in October 1537.
He dies, though, right?
It was a bittersweet moment, though, as Jane died of complications from the pregnancy a few days later. she might have been the only wife who Henry still loved when the marriage ended.
Yeah, because he got a male heir.
He would marry 3 more times, to Anne of Cleves, who he divorced 6 months after marrying her for being too ugly, to Catherine Howard, who was beheaded less than a year later for adultery, and finally Catherine Parr, an intelligent and compassionate woman who remained married to Henry until...
At this point, if you're a woman, I'm sure, marrying a king seems very enticing. But if you see how often he does horrible things or executes them, I might be like, it's not worth it. Unless he's like, I order you to marry me, then,
Till his death in 1547.
1 sec, guys. Sorry, guys, continue.
Henry knew he would die before Edward would come of age. He appointed a 16-man regency council under the leadership of Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, and Edward's maternal uncle, to manage the realm until then. As Lord Protector, Somerset dominated Edward's early reign. Edward was raised to be a devout Protestant, and his government was controlled by men of a similar mind. Unlike his father, Edward's reign saw aggressive Protestant reforms that reached down to the daily lives of English people. In line with Protestant beliefs, all images and relics in English churches were torn down, and England's chantries, which offered prayers to the departed, were also closed. The dissolution of the chantries also dissolved many related institutions, including schools, poorhouses, and hospitals, which had provided necessary support to the common people. The forcible introduction of a new Protestant Book of Common Prayer in 1549 proved to be a step too far. Edward's brief reign saw 2 serious rebellions. The first in Cornwall in 1549 against the Book of Common Prayer was put down with much brutality. A second erupted in the same year in Norfolk, but this time the primary complaint were the enclosures, which had been a nuisance for decades at this point. Kett's rebellion demanded royal limits on enclosures and numerous other reforms targeting abuses and exploitation relating to rents and tithes. This too was put down with tremendous slaughter. This disorder reflected badly on the Lord Protector, who was soon deposed and replaced by the Duke of Northumberland. Northumberland continued to advance the Reformation with a revised prayer book and mandatory church attendance to Protestant services in 1552. These were sweeping changes that reached into the daily lives of regular people, but they were halted in their tracks in 15...
So being a Lord Protector of a king that is just too young to make his own decisions yet, you're essentially the king until the legitimate king is old enough.
1553, when King Edward fell ill and died. This was a disaster for the Protestants, for their only heir was Edward's eldest half-sister, the devout Catholic Mary. Northumberland and the dying Edward hastily passed a law to declare his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as his successor.
Jesus.
But it was a pointless endeavor. Lady Jane Grey had little support, and the nation rallied towards Mary as the legitimate Tudor heir. Bloody Mary. On October 1st, 1553, Mary I became the first sovereign Queen of England. Mary's agenda was clear from the start: to restore Catholicism. Immediately, she rolled back her half-brother's reforms. She allowed the Catholic Mass to be celebrated again, restored icons and decorations to churches, and began to refound the monasteries her father had destroyed. Seeking to secure her foreign alliances and restore England to the Catholic fold, she announced her intention to marry King Philip II of Spain. This marriage was deeply controversial. Englishmen, both noble and commoner, hated the idea of a foreign king who might seize England for himself. In 1554, there was even a minor uprising known as Wyatt's Rebellion, which aimed to halt the marriage and oppose the Catholic Restoration, but it failed to achieve anything significant. The marriage went ahead, but not without Parliament passing strict laws limiting Philip's power. Like any monarch, Mary sought an heir, but she was already in her late 30s when she took the throne, and her husband showed little interest in staying in England. Twice Mary thought she was pregnant, and twice she was wrong. Mary's desperation to have an heir as an alternative to her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth was never alleviated. Mary's Catholicism dominated her reign, and it seemed clouded her judgment. In 1555, as part of her campaign to undo the Protestant Reformation, Mary began dispensing the ultimate punishment to Protestant heretics: burning. Around 300 Protestants were burned at the stake across England and Wales. Far from restoring Catholicism, the burnings horrified the populace and allowed the Protestants a martyr's death. Most famously, Thomas Cranmer, the former Archbishop of Canterbury who had engineered Henry's divorce from Mary's mother, was burned in Oxford in 1556, making him one of the most famous martyrs in English history. It was all for naught, since Mary's Catholic counter-reformation ended with her death in 1558. What she thought was a pregnancy turned out to be cancer. Unable to secure an heir, the throne passed to Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I.
Imagine that, thinking you finally you have an heir that could keep your Catholic sister, was it? And being like, is the baby good? Actually, no, it's not a baby, and actually, it's cancer. Would be just
first. Young, educated, and moderate, Elizabeth faced the immense task of settling England's chaotic religious affairs. Her approach was a middle way between hardline Protestantism and the trappings of old Catholicism. In the first 2 years of her reign, she passed acts of supremacy and uniformity to assert her place as head of the church and mandate the use of a revised Book of Common Prayer. In 1563, her government passed the 39 Articles to outline the beliefs of the Church of England. While more moderate than Edward's Protestantism, it was still undeniably Protestantism. But Elizabeth was more interested in stability than zealotry. She did not wish.
Maybe she learned from Mary's burning of, many people and then seeing them as martyrs as a lesson to not do that.
To make wid in stability than zealotry. She did not wish to make windows into men's souls, and so long as people outwardly conformed to the new religion, they faced no punishment for what they might believe in private. Many Catholics were still unhappy, and the most radical Puritan Protestants felt she didn't go far enough. She spent the rest of her reign trying to deal with these more radical
when you try to be more moderate, then everyone hates you, apparently.
Fringes. She spent the rest of her reign trying to deal with these more radical fringes, passing laws restricting the activities of Catholic missionaries and appointing church officials to root out radical Puritans. Ultimately, though, her middle ground approach satisfied the majority of the population, and her reforms were the foundation of the Anglican Church that stands to this day. One thing Elizabeth refused to do, though, was marry. Probably fearing that her husband would take her power, Elizabeth never tied the knot, claiming to be married only to England. Despite her epithet of the Virgin Queen, she definitely had lovers, but she remained unwed, much to the frustration of Mary's widow Philip II, who tried marrying Elizabeth to re-secure the English-Spanish alliance. This lack of an heir or the means to acquire one was a
Elizabeth I did have this longtime lover, though. I forget his name. Maybe he'll be mentioned.
Constant alliance. This lack of an heir or the means to acquire one was a constant security concern, which only became graver as Catholic Europe arrayed against her. In 1586, a Catholic plot to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary Queen of Scots, a descendant of Henry VII, was foiled, and Elizabeth had Mary executed. The execution of a Catholic monarch and potential heir was all the justification Philip needed to invade England and depose Elizabeth.
Christ.
Philip assembled a Spanish armada carrying tens of thousands.
This is going to work out well, right, guys? I know from history this is successful and Spain conquers England, right?
Thousands of troops to sail against England in 1588. With the most powerful empire in the world bearing down on her, Elizabeth's days seem numbered.
This is where
three
that guy,
factors saved England from defeat.
Francis Drake?
First, Elizabeth herself, whose steady leadership and rousing speeches to the troops restored hope in the face of certain defeat.
From this short video and short part about Queen Elizabeth I, I'm starting to admire her more.
Secondly, and most importantly, a tremendous storm hit the armada en route, sinking and damaging.
Kamikaze. The same thing happened with the Mongols invading, trying to invade Japan, I think twice. And I think twice a storm destroyed them, or at least once. And then Kamikaze, divine winds. So this reminds me of the Mongols trying to invade Japan, but nope, storm.
Any of the ships. Finally, the quick thinking of English captains like Sir Francis Drake and John Hawkins, who sent fire ships into the battered armada that inflicted devastating damage. Had Spain successfully landed, they probably would have won, but against all odds, England prevailed. The Elizabethan Age. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a high point in English history. England had fended off the greatest power in the world and was embarking on its own path to claim that title. The riches of the Americas had made Spain powerful, and Elizabeth was keen to do the same. English explorers had
Virginia, the state of Virginia, named after her.
First reached the Americas during Henry VII's reign, with the king commissioning John Cabot to conduct the first modern European exploration of the North American coast. Elizabeth intensified these exploration and colonization efforts, such as through Sir Walter Raleigh, who sailed out on her commission and named the territory of Virginia in her honor. Her reign also saw England's first attempt.
That's so cool how now even today you have two states in America that are named after Queen Elizabeth. You have Virginia, West Virginia.
At an American colony at Roanoke Island in modern North Carolina. Although the colony disappeared and its fate remains a mystery to this day.
Yeah, I've heard many stories about Roanoke. What was it? Croatoan. Yeah, that's a famous story in America about this historical mystery of what happened to the colony of Roanoke.
More consequential for England's future was her chartering of the East India Company in 1600 to manage trade in Asia. In time, the East India Company would become one of the most powerful arms of British imperialism. With religious stability, foreign rivals kept at bay, and English explorers entering new lands, it is no wonder that Elizabeth's reign is often seen as a golden age for England.
Maybe it not only just a golden age, but the start, I'm seeing it as sort of the start of the British Empire, what it would be. You have defeating, or at least, being lucky, but still defeating the great power at the time, superpower of Spain. You have her trying to moderate stuff after the more hardline Catholic or Protestants. And you had her as the beginning of an age of exploration going to America and the East India Company. She might be the most influential monarch of all time, from what I'm learning. Again, I'm learning about very broad videos, short videos, so I could be wrong. Let me know.
It was a golden age felt at many levels. On a government level, Elizabeth ruled efficiently and modestly. She avoided the extravagant spending of her father, and as a result, only called Parliament to session 13 times in her 44-year reign. She also expanded Parliament, particularly the House of Commons, with dozens of new seats to provide opportunity for the growing gentry. Despite hostility with some Catholic powers, trade flourished, and Elizabeth passed laws to protect and expand key economic sectors like the wool trade.
You see, I got Queen Victoria, and I got Gustavus Adolphus up here. I think I have an empty spot here. I try to alternate historical figures. I think I'm going to put Elizabeth I right here.
This wealth was funneled into a vibrant wave of artistic and architectural expression. Elizabethan England was a true Renaissance nation, where extravagant houses and dazzling works of art were more common than ever before. At the same time, new goods from distant lands flowed into England, like tobacco and potatoes, which were quickly available even to regular English people. All of this depended upon a thriving merchant class who were some of the biggest beneficiaries of the Tudor age. And of course, there could be no discussion of Elizabethan England's flourishing without discussing William Shakespeare.
Will, my boy Billy. I don't know why I'm saying that, but I had something important to say. Jesus Christ.
Of the Tudor age. Merchant class who were some of the biggest beneficiaries of the Tudor age. And of course, there could be no discussion of Elizabethan England's flourishing without discussing William Shakespeare. Born in Stratford-upon-Avon in 1564, Shakespeare began his career as an actor before becoming renowned as a poet and playwright. Shakespeare's extensive bibliography of plays, sonnets, and other works include many of the most famous stories in the English language.
Thanks, Shakespeare, for making... I hated English class. Sometimes it was called Lang and Lit, Language and Literature, sometimes English class. I hated English and all of this stuff. So Shakespeare is like 50% of high school English classes.
Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, and Macbeth, to name a few. His inventive use of idioms and rich portrayals of historical figures in his historical plays had an influence far beyond the stage. Shakespeare's popularity and influence demonstrates the thriving cultural environment of the Elizabethan Age, where great artists could enjoy fame and fortune, while the...
Yep, it's a great point that when... You can tell a lot about the success and prosperity of an age in any area of the world by how much time they have available to dedicate to arts and stuff like that. It's like you have to be doing pretty well for yourself if you have time to be able to focus on this stuff so much, right? So I'm really starting to love Elizabeth I, okay?
Masses could enrich themselves with the finest cultural productions of the era. For all of her successes, though, Elizabeth's final years were marked by economic hardship caused by lingering hostilities with Spain and an Irish rebellion in 1595. Inflation suppressed wages, especially towards the end of Elizabeth's reign, and there was a serious problem with vagrancy. The 1598 Poor Law...
Is vagrancy just, like, homelessness? Yeah, okay.
Provided for the relief and support of the poorest Englishmen, depending heavily on private philanthropy and wages, especially towards the end of Elizabeth's reign, and there was a serious problem with vagrancy. The 1598 Poor Law provided for the relief and support of the poorest Englishmen, depending heavily on private philanthropy and cooperation of the parish churches to tackle the problem. This poor law would remain in effect until the 19th century. Elizabeth died in 1603 after an impactful 44-year reign. With no heir, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the two historic antagonists under the same crown. The Tudor Age was over. But the story of religious change, global exploration, and England's rise to true power were only just beginning. If you'd like to help us keep creating and get early access to our videos, behind-the-scenes content, and other perks, consider becoming a member right here on YouTube or joining us on Patreon. Every bit of support helps. And as always, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much for making. I love that video. Knowledge videos are always great. I always leave them with just feeling like I learned way more than I should have in such a short time. And I think Queen Victoria might have just been dethroned for me for my favorite monarch of all time. Because I love Queen Victoria because I love the Victorian age. I love, like, mid 19th century to the very early 20th century, which was during the Victorian era. But I don't think Queen Victoria had as much of an impact on that era as Queen Elizabeth I did on her era. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. But, of course, this is a very quick learning experience, a very short video. You can't get into everything. But from what I learned, I think Queen Elizabeth I might be the most important British monarch of all time. And I'm not sure it's close. Let me know if you disagree, okay? Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you learned something or can teach me something in the comments. You guys are always great answering my questions. If I said anything wrong or stupid or whatever, call me out. Tell me I'm wrong. We'd love to see it. It's the whole point of learning. And I hope I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning together. Bye, guys.